is going to be a testing talk. I'm going to talk about actual testing. Let me ask you this. It's Thursday. It's the fourth day of the conference. How many of you have seen a screen where someone actually showed real software and said, how would you test this? How many have seen that yet? Oh, more than 0 hands. That's good. But not enough hands. So this is what I want to do. I would like to time box us to 5 minutes, show some actual software, talk about how we would test it. And there's lots of pieces to testing, right? We think of testing much wider than we used to. There is what should we build and how should we build it and what are the combinations and how do we monitor it and how do we release it more often. There's lots of pieces to testing, but this specifically once the user interface exists, how would we design tests around it? When we talk about that. Time box that to 5 minutes and then specifically start talking about what is coverage, how do we communicate it, how do we visualize it, how do we get better at it? Fair enough? Yeah? Okay. The latest iOS has some usability problems. 5 minutes on the clock. Okay, here's our software. It's a web-based application. We're going to have 5 stories. Just 5. Story number 1. It's insurance. It's automotive insurance. Prices are in euros. Forget the US dollar sign. And for these different ages, we have different prices. You type in the age, you click submit, and that's the user interface. And then down here, the price shows up. How many different ways should we test this? How many test ideas should we run? Anybody? Make up a number. Yeah. Test ideas that you would run. Okay, but how many? Right? With these requirements. This is story number 1. First build, first story, first gate. We just got it. We're going to test this story. How many different tests? Mike. This is. Yeah, there is a bug. There's a bug in the second age group. Good catch. Awesome. Let's say that's fixed, right? So you had your story kick off, and the manager said, "Good catch, Mike." All right. Right? So, and don't think of this as, I'm trying to trick you, I'm trying to trap you, this is an unfair question, there's no right answer. There are reasonable answers to this. How many tests would you run against this? Somebody? Yes. How many? 8? 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 7 categories there. And you would probably try 91, right? Yes? Sure? Yeah? Mike?
Just based on the number, maybe at least
10.
10.
Right. All the cases plus some invalid cases. That's equivalence class partitioning where you're saying each of these is roughly equal. You also might test boundaries, right? You might say at the transition points at 70 and 71 and 85, 50 and 51 and 55, something like that, right? You do that, you're going to come up with 16 tests, right? There's no right or wrong answer here. There's at least 90 different combinations. We're probably not going to run them all. So we have the offsetting task of what's the appropriate number, right? And when we offset, when we say I'm not going to run all 90, I'm going to run some subset, we introduce risk. And coverage is about how to minimize that risk, right? Story number 2, type of insurance dropdown. So you could have comprehensive, which means we cover everything. Your car gets hurt, then no deductible. So every dollar of damage that happens when the car gets in an accident is covered. The second one, there's a deductible, a dollar amount that you have to pay first. And the third one, we just cover the people that you run into, right? Now you've got to test both of these together. How many test cases should we run? We had 16 before. Right, so that would be 48, right? Now we're running 48 tests just to do story testing. The next one, the value of the vehicle influences. Look, I even remembered to use the euro sign there. at time. The value of the vehicle influences the cost. So how many test scenarios should we run now? Somebody. Sorry? Oh, at least one, right? Between 2 and 3? And yeah. Say we fix that. How many scenarios? Somebody. We had 48 on the last one. Now we're going to look at hundreds of combinations, right? Story number 4. Another drop down for your driving record. How many? How many combinations? 1,000 combinations. Years with no accident. Drop down. How many combinations? 4,000. 5 stories. 4,000 test scenarios. Now you could say, Matt, I would write a separate piece of software that could calculate the numbers, and I'd write a very big for loop, and I'd run through all of them with automation, and I would compare them. And that works. That works for a very small number of applications. Oh, there's our 5 minutes. It works for a very small number of applications. It's called model-driven testing, but it doesn't work very often. Realistically, we're probably going to have problems like this, and when you look at the number of combinations, you get what's called a combinatorial explosion. We're not going to test all of them. And that is the great challenge of testing, I think, is that we have this many test ideas and this much time, right? And we want to get better at selecting more powerful ideas in this much time. And to do that, we need to understand what the risks are and what's important to the business. So we need to communicate with the business what we're doing. Now, Agile's kind of shifted things around a bit. Anybody can test. They might not test well. Anybody can test. So we can always say, oh, I want that much. I want that much. I want that much. So either the project becomes a little later or the whole team goes a little slower. So we're making very, very complex trade-offs about how much time to invest in what testing. And if we're trusted, that's fine. But when we're not trusted, when it's a new team, when a bug slips through, people say, why didn't you find that bug? And if you're lucky on an Agile team, it's why was this defect introduced? Which is better than why didn't you find that? It's still a tough conversation. So what I want to do with the 40 or so minutes we have remaining is talk about tools to help you communicate, this is what we're covering. This is how we think about the software. These are the things that we are not testing. Should we spend more time? And you make that a conversation with your analysts, your stakeholders, your developers, to bring up more risks and to move toward constantly providing better information to decision makers. It's a true story. When I was at Social Text, we made a new product release, and it fell over in production for performance reasons. The first day, the entire production server melted down. We had our retrospective, and it was led by the CEO. We're a 40-person company. VP of engineering had just left. The CEO was the acting VP of engineering. It was in, why didn't the testers do the performance testing? Man, you screwed up. And the CEO of the company said, Matt informed me of the risks of performance testing and the amount of time it will take. And I made a calculated decision. I told him not to do it. What's next? Now, if we hadn't had that conversation, you think things might have gone a little differently? So this talk is about how to have those conversations. And it's not just about covering yourself. It's also about making better, more informed decisions about how to invest our time. Yep. Oh, by the way, we didn't even talk about coverage of what. So the 4,000 scenarios we came up with are almost, is there a laser in here? I don't know. Those 4,000 scenarios are almost all requirements coverage, right? We didn't talk about platform. We didn't talk about this has to work on a phone. We didn't talk about coverage in terms of lines of code or branches or functions. We didn't talk about what APIs we were going to hit, what the back end looked like, right? We didn't talk about what happened when you resize the browser It might work once, but there might be a memory leak. It might crash. Customer service might be using this all day, every day, and it takes up too much memory. We didn't talk about what to do if the wireless is flaky, or someone did mention invalid input. We didn't really talk about that. So it's going to be a lot more than 4,000, right? How do we ever ship anything? Now, there's two predominant ways of thinking about testing. One is that we just test all the things. So you make a list of all the stuff that you're going to test. You institutionalize it in an automated test. You run the automated test, and your list of automated tests just keeps getting bigger over time. Or maybe 20 years ago, you just run the same test cases, and your regression test process just keeps getting longer all the time, right? The other one is every build is different, the risks are different, so we need to come up with the emergent risks and test those until we run out of time. Maybe we time box that. And it's an exploratory approach. Those are the two ways people tend to talk about testing. At least testing of the entire system as a system right before release, right? And as Marcus Gartner, who's here this week, he told me, and I think this is great, is that testing the same thing every time is testing for known unknowns, while exploring is testing for the unknown unknowns. We want some combination of both. So I want you to imagine this is a dog park, right? And we're trying to clean it up and find the mess. And the little red dots are the doggy doo, right? The lines are the paths we take to clean up the doggy doo, or the tests we run through the software, right? The dog poop are the bugs. We're trying to find and eliminate the bugs. So if we test the same thing every time, the little blue dots are where it's been cleaned up. What is the value the next time we run those tests? Not much. If we happen to have a bug that is exactly along the lines of the problem we already checked for, then we can find and fix it. That's what we mean by to regress. That is what we mean by regression testing. But it's not going to find anything else. So we have to balance, sure, on e-commerce, right? And for our example, the next steps would have been create an actual customer in the system and then pay for it and then set up recurring payments. What we call path to purchase, kind of important. We might want to check that a lot. Search and path to purchase for Amazon.com, kind of important. Might want to check that the same every time. But we also have this exploring. So we're constantly challenged to balance these, right? And what we used to do is we used to be able to measure, here's the amount of coverage we have for this release. But in continuous deployment, we're releasing several times a day. It's probably not going to. So how are we going to think about coverage in a world where we release frequently? That's what I want to talk about in the time we have left, right? So it really depends where you are. If you do quarterly releases, you might use one strategy, and continuous delivery a different one. And as your company changes, they might become, the strategies might be more or less relevant. So I'm going to throw a bunch of ideas out at you. This is from a company that we worked with about 2 years ago, and they had a whole lot of test cases. And they would have this conversation, why is testing taking so long, right? These should be 15 minutes apiece, and you're just taking too long. So the first thing we had them do was actually figure out how much they got done in one day and figure out how many minutes that should be. It was about 180, about 3 hours out of an 8-hour day. And then based on that data, they could project when they were going to be done, and it's going to take too long. Okay, so how much time do we have? We've got a week. All right. This is for final integration system test. So if we only have a week, and we know we're going to get 180 minutes a day done, you can multiply 180 by 5, and we can figure out this is how much we're going to get done this week. So the next important piece is the prioritizing. Is that a word? The prioritizing piece, where we decide, let's get a priority on the system from 1 to 10 and sort and say these things are above the cut line, they're going to get done, right? If you think we're getting all the testing done, if you think you're getting all the testing done at the time you have to test, you probably have a problem with test creativity, right? I mean, we just did 5 stories and came up with 4,000 test ideas. 5 trivial stories, very simple and small. And these are the things below the cut line. And you can put that on a big screen, put that in a Google document, share it with management, share it with our analysts, share it with our developers. What ideas are we missing? What should we add? What should we take away? What's the right order? What's below the cut line that should be above? What's above that we can defer? A great way to do this, a couple great ways to do this. One is we find some bugs up here and we run out of time. We're out of time. We got to ship. Okay. Well, what about all this stuff down here? Well, we found bugs in the stuff in the top that we're not fixing. The stuff at the bottom, is that really as important? The other thing that happens, why didn't testing find that bug? Well, we would have. It was below the cut line. We ran out of time. So the different question to ask would be, if we hadn't tested the stuff at the top and there were defects in it, but we had tested this bug we missed, would that have been better? The answer is no. Then we did our job, we set our priorities, we invested the right amount of time in testing. Maybe next time we should invest more. If the answer is yes, then the problem is not with the testing, it's with the priorities. So we need to have this conversation more. The business analysts, the product owners, should become our best friends. We should take them out for lunch. We should have coffee with them. We should find out what risks they're worried about so we can make this as accurate as possible. So how do we set up the priority? This is really hard. So imagine every single possible direction here in this diagram is a feature. I say, I can do an incredibly poor job of testing everything in an hour. I can do a slightly better job in a day. I can do a slightly better job in a week. But there are some features like path to purchase, search, create an account, profile edit, that might be more important than others. So it would be more like the first time we go around the circle, we actually want to get 2 dots on, or 3 dots on path to purchase. And the second time around the circle, we want to get 5. So we come up with these test ideas and we can tag them by feature and say we actually want to hit this feature a little harder than the others. So when I'm coming up with the priorities, first I make the big list. Then I draw this on a whiteboard and I say, what are the features that we really care about? Another way to get that, besides pulling it out of our customers, is to look at log data and say, what are the features that get used 80% of the time? And what do we do about those other 20%? Now, maybe those other 20% are the buy button, and maybe it's important anyway. Maybe not. Another strategy to visualize this is a low-tech testing dashboard. Now, for legacy applications where we have limited time, this can be very valuable. Where this is a Google spreadsheet from a real client. We've taken out the, I've grayed out the feature list. The browsers are at right. Eventually, with Android and iOS and different versions, this became very, very wide. Quality is a measure from 1 to 10. Coverage is a measure from 1 to 10. And we have a rubric, a guideline for what those different numbers mean. Those are drop-downs. When you select the quality number, the colors change. When you select the coverage number, the darkness of the row changes. So you can get a really good look at how well we've covered the application. And then when an executive says, can we ship, you can say, look at the dashboard, what do you think? Same company, Social Text, we actually developed, the first time I really used this, we were developing a online spreadsheet before Google Docs was a thing. We hired the creator of the spreadsheet, Dan Brickland, to write it. Selenium, the tooling wasn't really there yet at the time that we could automate the different pieces. And there's a lot of visual pieces. There's a lot of, when I click bold, does it look bold? Does it look right? Bold and underlined and italics. So I actually did this using our spreadsheet, coloring the different columns and rows. And again, it was the CEO who, instead of pressuring me to ship, got on the daily stand-up call, and he said, the testing dashboard is lit up like a Christmas tree. We've got to fix that. Okay, boss, if you say so. Right. This particular one was used by an e-commerce project where we went to production every other sprint, and testing took about a week. And some of you with a little gray hair have probably experienced this before, where regression testing is a little chaotic and it's not really just defined well, and people say, how's it going? And you say, oh, it's going. And they say, are we going to be ready to ship? I guess so, right? You know, maybe you can look at the filed bugs list, but you say, I'll take IE, you take Chrome, you take Firefox, you take iOS, you take Android, and your stand-up is just kind of, I found bug 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then and we added a column at the right for defects, and then that tracked back to Jira. It doesn't fit, but so that if it's red, actually, yeah, if it's red, you go look at the bug, you click on it, and you could see how bad it was. It really gave you a good indicator of status. The challenge with this is you have this decay process, because we're not doing this release every 2 weeks as much. Maybe you are, and this is fantastic. But we're not doing it nearly as much as we used to. My clients are increasingly. So this might be all the testing that we've done over the past week, but you never know if this is pricing. You don't know if pricing has changed radically in the past 2 days, and you're not going to make a new spreadsheet every day. We'll talk about some techniques to deal with that. This is a mind map. Actually, it comes from something Lisa did. Right? If you were at the World Cup, you saw teams making mind maps. They had 3 hours to test. Not only is this a visual map of the software, you can show it to a developer. The power in this is in the communication. Yeah, you can help you plan your test work, but you draw this on the board and people can walk by and they can say, oh, actually, sale connects to reports, and you're going to want to test that transition because you can put data in there that'll change that in real time. Or even, if a salesperson is in here, they could be changing it while you click the run button. I wonder what's going to happen. Is that going to lock the database? Oh. You get test ideas. You forgot about this. Thank you. That's awesome. The other thing you can do is you can take a marker and you can do a green check or a yellow line or a red frowny face for how much coverage you've got. Or you can do little tick marks by it. So then, very quickly, you can say, reports is green, but it doesn't have much coverage. I'm going to spend more time on it. You can also do a tick mark every time you've tested a piece, and then once a week, you just take a tick mark away. So we're moving from, this is the build, and we will test the candidate build. And once the candidate build is good, we can release it, to we're going to test all the time for emergent risks, in addition to testing stories. And if we move to we test all the time for emergent risks, then when it comes time to do continuous delivery, we can support that. And hopefully find the defects before too many customers do. This is a decision tree. This is actually from Pete Whalen, who tested when you have to enter your zip code into, I don't know if you have this in Europe, in the United States, you put your credit card in it asks you for your zip code now so people can't steal your credit card. Turns out there's a lot of combinations. But not only do we have the decision tree, but you also have the capability to go in, put this up on your intranet, on your wiki, put a check mark as you've tested each piece, or maybe 2 or 3 check marks for various combinations. And if you are releasing frequently, start aging it out and taking check marks away. And I think it's a decision tree, but it's actually built with a mind mapping tool, right? So MindMup is a simple free online mind mapping tool. You can get started today if you're not already doing that. I like whiteboards. Physical. Touch it. Let me see it. Let me feel it. This is from a company called QA Symphony. It is an inactive client of ours. We've done some work with them. This is a heat map. So this ties into Jira and their software. And for any feature, you can define test cases. If the box is bigger, it means there's more test. I prefer the term test ideas. I like to make these really light, fast, easy. I don't have time to do test cases anymore. I haven't had in a long time. So the upper left-hand corner is there's a lot of test ideas there, and the bottom right, not so many, and it can track the number of failures and it can do coloring for you. So you can look and say, why is this piece so small? Why is this piece so big? And jiggle around your coverage. And you can also look at, that is currently failing. How big a deal is that? Personally, I probably, if you've got the tool, that's great, but you could also do that just on a board, just in Excel, for any given sprint. This is from a tool called Hexawise. So, and this is at the feature level, you often have these combinatorial explosions where you have 4,000, 8,000, 10,000, a million different combinations. We're never going to test them all. So the National Institute of Science and Technology in the US, NIST, did some research, and they found for a certain, I forget the type of, I think it was medical devices, you could find 80% of the problems through combinations of 2 variables. So you can actually, one of the ways to decrease your number of tests is to run combinations. If we just added up all of the different ideas in those 5 stories, we'd only have 30 tests, but it'd be way too weak. But if we got all the combinations of pairs, it'd be more like 85. That might be reasonable. I'm going to show you this in action from one of our actual customers. I did not realize this was going to be recorded, but so we have here, we support Chrome, iOS, and IE 10. It's a financial product for retirement in the US, which could be a personal, joint, traditional, or Roth account. You could live in different states. There's different laws for California and Louisiana. You could be a US citizen or no idea what our RA is. It's apparently a different country they support. I didn't realize we were doing that. We can create the tests. It'll get us all the combinations. We can do 2-way, 3-way, or 4-way. And then we'll get more tests that we can run. And we can analyze the tests. So this is the coverage part, right? So for 2-way interactions, as the number of test ideas increase, we get a higher percentage of coverage. So you can ask the question, testing takes so long, we have so many test ideas, according to this model that we're looking at, it would take this long, what percentage is good enough? And the real magic is in their coverage matrix. Where we can actually do a slider and say, how many tests do we want to run? So the answer comes back through a conversation and collaboration with the educated management team that we want to do 4 tests. Why was there a bug in Louisiana on IE10? Oh, we didn't test that. So, should we test more next time? It's going to slow us down, or should we change our priorities? Now we're involving our customers in what we test, which will create a sense of ownership and agency. And when the new vice president is hired and says, we've got to test everything, we can't have these risks, our own customers will stand up and go to the whiteboard and draw these pictures and explain to them. I've worked for a few companies like that. I prefer it. Right. So this is the architecture for Gmail. It's what's called a SOFIA architecture, service-oriented front-end architecture. I drew this myself. You can probably tell. The front end is static. There's no server-side processing. Instead, it goes to microservices, which then retrieve your inbox, the data. You can tag, or put something in a folder, and then you can search by that tag and then find them, right? And these go back to a database eventually. Everything goes back to a database. And the advantage of this architecture is that when you have some GUI tests defined, and you fix and make a change to search, and you run all the things that this interacts with, and all the services tests to make sure that it keeps its contract, you can deploy just search on its own, which is how we can deploy, how Google can deploy however many times per day they do for Gmail. You may remember this. When Gmail came out, it was really flaky. It was around 2006. It was a while. 2005 was a while ago. It was in beta. It was free. And it would be a break. It would just break. It just wouldn't work. You'd click search and it would be blank screen. That's weird. And then you'd go to lunch and you'd come back and it would be fixed. And I guess it was my browser. It must have been a caching issue. Maybe it's a cookie. I don't know. It works now. It was good enough. And the reason they could do that was because it would break, they'd heavily monitor it, they'd know the problem was in the past hour, they know that in the past hour they only released these two, the problem is in search, they isolated it, they could either roll it back immediately or fix it, retest it, and deploy it, right? So in this world, we're not going to have time to do this testing dashboard. It doesn't make any sense. Retest everything, that's crazy. Besides, we have a bunch of GUI tests. So what I recommend is a testing Kanban board. Because we're still going to have emergent risks. Still going to have emergent risks. So what do we do? Well, we're going to automate all the things. We're going to do Selenium, right? I worked with one company, and we had a wiki page that was the things we can't automate, haven't had time to automate, don't make sense to automate. Printing, right? Selenium cannot reach into the operating system and do file print, save to PDF. Even if it could, you would need some kind of PDF viewer software to pop up and then look at the rendering and then compare it to what you had before and swizzle all the dates so that they all matched. Not worth doing. The problem I see with most companies is when they run into this, they test it once manually and they forget about it. They put on these automation blinders, right? It's not automated, we don't look at it. So we want to keep some sort of list of things that maybe a human should look into that we can go back to periodically, and we can pull from. So either a Kanban or a list. If we actually had a wiki page, we could say when this was last tested, and we could sort by when it was last tested, and we could retest things periodically. We're going to invest 5% of our time in testing for these emergent risks, and the list is going to get longer, and sometimes we'll take things away. Or we can just, this is an actual customer, this is a real whiteboard, again, grayed out. And we put these ideas up, which represent a session, 15 minutes or less of testing, described in such a way anyone on the team can pull it. And then this was before release, but what I'm seeing now is more all the time, every day, I'm just going to pull one of these things. Anybody can walk by and say, why are you testing this before that? We should change the priorities. So they can see and visualize what the test team is working on. If this list is growing too fast because we're in crunch mode, management is at least aware that we are deferring risks because we're in crunch mode. Or maybe we need to shift more resources around to be in test. Or there's more to the world of testing than we see in the requirements, right? Putting all that together. I like visuals. I like to come up with a model. Of course, the model is not going to be all 4,000. So then we have to educate that it's a map, not the territory. Publish it, update it continuously. We want to think about the results of other runs, right? We're trying to balance what we do with tooling and what the human does. We put a time box on it, and when the time box hits, if we don't have any reason not to, we can go ahead and ship. Over time, the different pictures, the models we used won't make sense. They'll become obsolete. We'll get better and better and better. You know, we can pick a new model. Eventually, we're going to release, eventually it might make sense for some companies to release continuously. We track the highest risks and test for them all the time. At eBay, they do that in production. That's okay. I think I have 2 minutes. Questions? Yes, Mike. Absolutely, yeah. So where's our 80% coverage? What's the 80% we can get for 20% of the effort? And if we're doing something like all pairs, you can say, I want to prefer these sorts of things over those, and then your pairs that pop up, you'll get higher coverage there. Very good, thank you. One more? Yes. Did I make a typo? If you give me your business card afterward, I'd be happy to send you the slides, and when the video is up, I will be happy to send you a link to the video. It's probably going to be on YouTube. So, I'll close. So thank you so much for investing your time in me. It's the most valuable thing you have. I'm so honored you chose to come to this session. I think that in Agile, we don't talk about coverage enough, and hopefully this gave you some ways to think about it, at least things to draw on the whiteboard to explain our job to people who might not really understand our job or how hard it is. This picture, I actually at one point hired a graphics designer, believe it or not, to help me. She did not do the Gmail slide, that's all me. But I had this at the closing slide, and she said, I think I can get you a better picture of stock photography of two kids for your ending. Put them on a beach or something, flying a kite. So these are my daughters. On the right is Rachel, and the left is Katie. This is at Twin Pines Elementary School in Allegan, Michigan. And no, I don't think you can get me better stock photography. And their future is bright. And these problems are hard. And if we can become the trusted advisors steering the business to how to invest in risk management, I think our future is bright too. Thank you. God bless you.